After her mother passed away, Emily, an 18-year-old girl, had to live with her stepfather whom she did not love. What will happen to the life of a teenage girl and her stepfather? In today's story, we will listen to the story of Emily, a story that will take you through many interesting emotions. Welcome back to the Daily Unexpected Stories channel. The wind chimes on the porch jingled softly as the breeze blew past. The small two-story house was nestled in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Oregon, USA. It used to be filled with laughter, but now there was only the hollow sound of echoing through the walls. Emily sat on the sofa, her eyes glued to the TV, which was playing a cooking show that she didn't bother paying attention to. The sound was just an excuse to fill the silence. She turned down the volume when she heard familiar footsteps coming from the door. Robert, the man she never thought she would call Dad, walked into the house. His suit slightly wrinkled from a long day of work. He removed his tie, took off his jacket and hung it on the rack, then quietly walked toward the kitchen. Emily knew he would do the same thing every day: prepare dinner, set the plate on the table, and hope she would join him. "Emily, do you want to eat dinner?" His voice rang out, trying to keep it casual. "Not hungry," she answered curtly, her eyes never leaving the screen. He sighed softly, but did not press. Everything had changed since her mother, Sarah, had remarried Robert a year ago. She had always said he was a good man. He was gentle, calm, never angry, and always tried to get along. But to Emily, his presence was a bitter reminder that her family was no longer intact. She missed her real father, the man who had promised to be with her forever, but had left after a tearful divorce. She missed the evenings when they had cooked together, laughed together. Robert might be kind, he might be patient, but he was not her father. That fact made Emily build a cold wall between them. Dinner was as usual. Robert ate alone. The sound of knives and forks clinking against plates was audible. Emily went upstairs immediately after grabbing a small bag of snacks from the cupboard. She locked the door, put on her headphones, and let the music fill the void. Downstairs, Robert sat staring at the family photo hanging on the wall. In it, Sarah smiled happily, her arm around Emily's shoulder as they went on a picnic. He was just an outsider, though he had become part of the family. He muttered to himself, "Sarah, you're right, this isn't easy." Night fell. Emily tossed and turned in bed, her eyes glued to the ceiling. She heard Robert lock the door, turn off the lights, and the house fell silent. The next morning, the sky was gray. Thick clouds lazily drifted past Emily's window. The alarm clock rang loudly, causing her to sit up groggily, her eyes stinging from a poor night's sleep. She walked downstairs. Robert was there, the kitchen smelling of toast and eggs. He always got up early, preparing a full breakfast, even though he knew she usually only drank a glass of milk or skipped meals. "Good morning," Robert said, trying to keep his cheerful tone. Emily nodded slightly, not answering. She poured a glass of milk and sat down 2 chairs away from him. The atmosphere was so awkward that even the ticking of the clock on the wall was audible. Robert mustered up the courage to start a conversation. "You have a history test today, right? Do you need some help reviewing? I'm good at that subject." "No need," Emily answered quickly, almost cutting off his good intentions. He pursed his lips, nodded, and then looked down to continue his breakfast. Emily knew Robert was trying. She knew, but every word he said, gentle or kind, seemed to touch her sensitive nerves. Not because he was bad, but because his presence only emphasized the emptiness in her heart. Mom had been there, in this very chair, smiling brightly whenever she told stories about school. Now he was the only one left, the one who took her place, and she didn't want to acknowledge it. She put on her backpack and stood up quickly. "I'm going to school." Robert started to say something, but then stopped. He just watched the young girl leave the house, the door closing softly but firmly. That evening, Emily came home later than usual. She didn't explain why, just coldly climbed upstairs. Robert sat in the living room, turned on the TV but couldn't concentrate. He tried not to push her too fast. When Sarah was alive, she always advised him to be patient, that Emily just needed time. But time passed day by day, week by week, month by month, and the wall between them seemed to grow stronger. Robert opened his phone and scrolled through old photos. In one taken on his and Sarah's wedding day, Emily stood next to her mother, smiling awkwardly. At that time, he had hoped that things would get better with time. But now, he was left with just himself and that little girl, two lonely people living under the same roof, between invisible walls separating them. Late at night, Emily lay curled up under the blanket, eyes wide open in the darkness. She didn't listen to music, nor surf the internet. There was only the sound of the wind blowing softly through the cracks in the door. Her heart was filled with conflicting emotions. She knew Robert wasn't at fault, but at the same time, she couldn't open her heart. Everything was too fast, too different, and most of all, she was afraid that if she accepted him, it would mean accepting that her mother was really gone. That means the old days will never come back. In the meantime, a tear silently rolled down her cheek. Emily whispered softly in the dark, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'm sorry, Mom, I can't accept this yet." On the other side of the wall, Robert was still awake, staring at the ceiling. No one said anything. No one knew the other was also awake. But both were locked in lonely rooms, just a few steps apart, but 1,000 miles away. Time passed slowly, as if the world had fallen silent. Autumn gave way to winter. Mornings were foggy, and the small house where Robert and Emily shared increasingly resembled a cold fortress, each locked in a separate tower. Emily was 18 now. She had grown accustomed to her mother's absence, but she had never grown accustomed to Robert's presence. Their relationship had stagnated, or worse, seemed to be retreating. Robert was patient, but the long silences were wearing him down. He noticed that whenever he spoke, Emily either dodged or responded coldly. She no longer fought back, but the indifference hurt more. It was like a glass pane between them. They could see each other, but they couldn't touch. Dinners became simpler and less wordy. Sometimes Robert tried to create a topic of conversation, but Emily only responded with curt answers. "How was your day?" "Fair enough. Are you planning on applying to any schools yet?" "I don't know." Robert had thought that with time, everything would be fine, but time became an accomplice of distance. He began to wonder if he was doing something wrong, or if Emily would simply never accept him. Then Lily appeared. They met for the first time on a Friday afternoon. Emily brought Lily home. The girl with pale blue hair and a bright smile immediately brought new life to the gloomy house. Lily greeted Robert politely when she entered the house, something Emily rarely did. "Hello, I'm Lily. Thanks for letting me come over," she said cheerfully. Robert was a little surprised. "Nothing. Go ahead. Are you too hungry? I can make something for dinner." Emily looked up at Robert, her eyes no longer as cold as usual. Perhaps because Lily was there, she didn't want to appear too upset. "I'm fine. We'll order food later," Lily interjected, smiling lightly. Still, Robert prepared some snacks and left them on the kitchen table. He silently watched as the two girls laughed, watched movies, and even cooked noodles for a late-night snack. The house suddenly became unusually lively. Lily's frequent appearances became a familiar thing. Every few days, she would come over. Sometimes she would have dinner with them. Sometimes she would stay overnight. Robert didn't object. On the contrary, he silently thanked Lily. At least, Emily smiled more when she was with her friend. On the rare occasions when the two of them left the room, he heard giggling, conversations about school, movies, and even about trivial things. Those sounds made him feel good. At least she has someone to share, he thought, relieved. However, even with Lily, the distance between Emily and Robert remained the same. When they were alone, the silence returned. She still kept a safe distance, still refused any interference from him in her personal life. Robert understood. He did not push. He accepted being a bystander, as long as Emily was okay. Only, he could not have imagined that one day, Lily, the girl he thought was the small door that helped him get closer to Emily, would become the source of the biggest shock of his life. That evening, it rained. Oregon always had days like that, a steady rain that seemed to seep into the heart. Robert got off work late. He stopped by the supermarket near his work to pick up some food. As he passed the fruit stand, he stopped. The cantaloupes were neatly arranged, their skins plump and juicy. Emily loves melons. Sarah used to say that when she was little. He bought one. with a small hope in his heart. Maybe if he brought Emily and Lily some good melons tonight, they would be happy. Maybe he could sit down and chat for a while. Just a little, he thought. It was dark when Robert got home. The house was strangely quiet, except for the soft music coming from Emily's room upstairs. He took off his coat, washed his hands, and carefully cut the melons into even pieces. He arranged them on a plate, carried them upstairs, and knocked lightly on the door. "Emily, I have some delicious melon. Do you two want some?" There was no answer. Robert heard giggling coming from inside. The door was only ajar. Thinking that the girls were busy chatting or wearing headphones, he pushed the door open and entered gently. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Before his eyes was the image of Emily and Lily sitting next to each other on the bed. Emily leaned back slightly, and Lily was leaning down, placing a kiss on her lips. It wasn't the intimate cheek kiss of friends. It was a real kiss, slow, gentle, but meaningful. Robert stood still, eyes wide, the plate of melon in his hand tilted slightly, causing a few pieces to slide to the floor. The soft clatter of them broke the moment. Emily turned around, startled. She looked at Robert, her eyes panicked, and Lily also hurriedly got out of bed, awkwardly pulling the blanket over herself. No one said anything. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Robert felt his throat dry, his heart pounding, but he wasn't angry. There was only confusion, bewilderment, and pain. "I'm sorry," he stammered, turning away. The plate of melons fell to the floor as he hurried out of the room, closing the door behind him. He couldn't sleep all night. The images from earlier kept replaying in his mind. Emily, his daughter, was gay? Why didn't he know? Why didn't she say anything? And what was he supposed to do about it? On the other side of the door, Emily sat curled up, her face buried between her knees. Lily had left quietly not long after. The room was filled with shame, embarrassment, and something like fear. Emily didn't know how Robert would react. He had always been nice, but she had never tried to break the unspoken rules between them. Now, everything was falling apart. She didn't exactly love Lily. She had never thought of herself as gay. But that sudden kiss and her awkwardness made Robert misunderstand. Worse, she didn't have the courage to explain right away. The night passed heavily. Neither of them could sleep, each facing their own worries and questions. But one thing was certain. The distance between them, already large, was now like a bottomless abyss. Robert wondered what he should do. He thought of Sarah. His dead wife had held his hand gently and said, "If anything happens, always love her, no matter what. She is still your daughter." But, Sarah, what if I don't know how to love? Robert asked himself in the dark, alone. The days that followed were more intense than ever. Emily barely left her room. When she went downstairs to get food or to get ready for school, she would just pass Robert as if he were invisible. No more awkward nods or polite greetings. Nothing, just a cold space between them. Robert, though he had been prepared for the distance, felt more pushed away than ever. He remembered that moment, the image of Emily and Lily kissing playing over and over in his mind like a broken tape. Is she really gay? He wasn't a conservative, living in America. He understood that society was much more open. But when it happened to his own family, to the daughter he had promised Sarah he would protect, all theories seemed to collapse. He went online to find out. During sleepless nights, Robert read hours of articles about LGBTQ+, about how parents can accompany their children. But the more he read, the more confused he became. Strange terms, diverse perspectives. He didn't know which way was right. Sometimes he blamed himself. Was it because I was too distant that Emily didn't dare to share? Did I make her feel unsafe? But there were also times, deep down, he felt hurt, not because of the truth about Emily's gender or orientation, but because he realized she had never trusted him. To Emily, he was forever an outsider, no matter how hard he tried. The title, Stepfather, was like a sticker that couldn't be peeled off. A week passed since that day. It was a humid evening. It had been raining since the afternoon. The sky was pitch black, drops of water falling on the glass door. Robert cooked a simple dinner, chicken soup and bread, but Emily didn't come down to eat. He left her some and cleaned up after himself, sighing. At 10 p.m., as Robert was about to turn off the lights and go to bed, He realized Emily still hadn't come home. That was odd. She always came home before 9 p.m. Or at least texted him. He checked his phone. No text. No missed calls. Worry began to creep in. Robert called Emily. No answer. He texted. No answer. The wind outside picked up, bringing with it a steady rain that lashed against the porch. Robert felt his heart constrict. An invisible fear welled up. He tried to stay calm, telling himself, maybe she's out with friends. She'll be fine. But that thought didn't stop him from grabbing his car keys and rushing out. Robert drove through the streets around the house. Streetlights blurred behind the rain-soaked windshield. He stopped by Emily's favorite coffee shop, the little bookstore on the corner, and even stopped by Lily's house. Even though he knew the two girls had lost touch after that incident, there was no sign of Emily. Every time he turned the car around the corner, his heart sank. A series of bad scenarios appeared: an accident, being followed by a bad guy, or, the worst, no, it can't be. As the clock was approaching midnight, Robert returned home, soaked to the skin. He was almost exhausted, but when he opened the door and stepped inside, he froze. Emily was sitting on the sofa, wearing a hoodie, her hair still slightly wet. She was startled when she saw him, her eyes wide. "Where are you going?" Emily asked, her voice a little confused. Robert looked at her, not knowing whether to cry or scold. He rushed over, almost shouting in pent-up anxiety. "Where have you been all night? Do you know how dangerous it is? Do you know how worried I was?" Emily stepped back a little, seemingly panicked, but when she saw Robert's wet appearance, tired face, and red eyes, something inside her softened. "I just went to a friend's birthday party. I forgot to text you." She lowered her head and mumbled. The silence lasted for a long time. Then suddenly, Emily stood up, awkwardly walked over, and poured Robert a cup of warm tea. "You, drink this, don't catch a cold." Robert took the cup of tea, surprised. This was the first time in a long time that Emily had taken the initiative to do something for him. No one said anything more, but in that moment, amid the steam rising from the cup of tea, something had changed. Not quite forgiveness or reconciliation, but a small crack in the cold wall. A first crack. The next day, something seemed different about the house. Not a visible change, but Robert could feel it. Emily came down to breakfast. She was no longer as sullen as usual. When Robert said good morning, she responded, quietly, but it was a real response. Robert didn't say anything about last night all day. He knew that if he tried to force it or get to it too quickly, things might fall apart. Instead, he waited for Emily to be ready. That evening, when they were sitting together in the living room, a rare occurrence, Robert decided to speak up. "Emily," he hesitated. She looked up at him. "Waiting, are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft but sincere. Emily was taken aback by the question. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes on the glass of water in her hand. Finally, she shook her head. "No, I don't think so," she admitted, her voice hoarse. Robert nodded slightly, as if this answer was already expected. "If you're not happy, you can tell me anything. I don't promise to understand everything, but I want to help." He paused for a beat, then continued, "Even between you and Lily." At that moment, Emily raised her head. She looked straight into his eyes, her eyes slightly surprised. "Dad knows that, and still." She trailed off. Robert smiled sadly. "Dad may not understand everything, but he knows that when your mother was alive, she only wanted you to be happy. If that makes you happy, he agrees." The words left Emily speechless. She looked at him for a long time. It was no longer cold, guarded, or rejecting. For the first time in a long time, her eyes were softer. After a few seconds of silence, she sighed, put the glass of water on the table, and sat up straight. "Dad, actually," she said slowly, as if about to reveal a long-standing secret, I don't think I'm gay." Robert frowned slightly, listening without interrupting. "That day, the person who kissed me was Lily. She had feelings for me. I was really surprised. I never thought of her that way. After that day, I talked frankly with Lily and we stopped contacting each other." Emily lowered her head, her voice soft. The room fell into silence. Robert leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. After a while, he exhaled slowly. "So, you've been keeping that in your heart all this time," he said. Emily smiled faintly, her eyes flashing with a bit of shame. "I thought you, Dad would react violently. I didn't know how to explain. And, actually, I didn't want to open up to you. Because my mother died," Robert continued softly, not as a question, but as an understanding. Emily raised her head, her eyes stinging. "Because Mom died. I hate everything that changes. I hate that Mom is no longer here. I hate the idea of accepting a new family. If I accept Dad, I have to admit that Mom is really gone." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks as she said those words. For the first time, she confessed the deepest thing in her heart. Robert said nothing. He just moved closer, wrapping his arms around the little girl, the person he had always wanted to protect, but had been unable to reach all this time. Emily buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing like a child. "I'm sorry," she choked. Robert tightened his arms, speaking softly as if he was promising Sarah. "It's okay. Dad is still here. We'll always be here." That night, for the first time in years, the small house fell into a peaceful sleep. There was no invisible wall between them. The next morning, Emily walked downstairs, smiling slightly when she saw Robert busy cooking breakfast. "Dad," she called out. Robert turned around, surprised to hear her calling him by that title. "I want pancakes. Can you make them?" Robert laughed, feeling like he had just won the most precious prize in life. "Of course." The atmosphere in the house changed dramatically after that night. Breakfasts were no longer quiet. Emily no longer hurriedly ate or avoided Robert's gaze. She even asked him what he wanted to add to his shopping list. That simple thing, to Robert, was like a miracle. "I think we should try lasagna today. How's that?" Emily smiled softly as they strolled around the supermarket on the weekend. "I'd love it," Robert replied, a little embarrassed because he was not used to this sudden openness. But deep down, he felt strangely warm. They began to have small habits. Emily helped Robert clean up after meals. The two of them took care of the backyard garden, which had been neglected since Sarah died. Robert realized that Emily loved gardening. She often leaned close to the flower pots, caring for each leaf, her eyes sparkling as she watched the new buds bloom. One late afternoon, as the two of them were resting in the garden, Emily suddenly spoke. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question took Robert by surprise. He looked at her, the young woman who now called him Dad. Albeit with some hesitation. "I feel that way every day," he answered honestly. "I miss your mother so much. Every morning I wake up, I wish I could hear her voice. But then the house is filled with the ticking of the clock." Emily bowed her head and nodded slightly. "Me too," she said softly. "Sometimes I hate myself for not being able to get through it. I keep running away and blaming you. I know that's not fair." Robert shook his head, gently. "It's okay, Emily. Everyone has their own way of dealing with pain. You don't have to apologize. I just wish there was something I could do to make you feel better." Emily looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. She thought about the past months, when she had pushed him away, when she had rejected his every attempt to connect. Robert had never given up. "Though, you were patient," she said softly. "I'm grateful for that, because I was worth it," Robert replied, as if it were a given. That evening, as they ate dinner, Emily hesitantly brought up the matter. "Dad, about Lily," she began, a little confused. Robert put down his knife and fork. "Listening, I'm really not gay. That day, I was just passive. Lily kissed me. I didn't know what to do. So I kept quiet, but after that, I talked it out with her and we stopped seeing each other." Robert nodded. He had guessed it from their previous conversation, but hearing Emily confirm it from her own mouth made him feel a little better. "That's not what I care about," Robert said slowly. "What I care about is whether you're happy. I just want you to be yourself. Whoever you are." Emily looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time in months, she felt truly understood. "Dad," she called, her voice trembling. Robert smiled softly. "I'm here, always." In that moment, the last of the distance between them disappeared. No more stepfather and stepdaughter. No more awkward days. They had truly become a family. In the days that followed, the little house seemed to change. No more long silences. No more dinners with only the sound of knives and forks hitting plates. Instead, there were trivial stories about school, about favorite TV shows, even old stories about her mother, Sarah. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch, Emily suddenly asked, "Do you miss your mother?" Robert looked out into the distance, where the sunset was slowly falling. "Every day," he replied, his voice low, "but I think your mother would be happy to know that we could sit here like this." Emily smiled. It was a gentle smile, but full of empathy. She had learned to face the loss, no longer avoiding it. "I think so too," she said, leaning her head on Robert's shoulder. "You always wanted me to be happy, right?" "Yes, and I believe happiness begins with acceptance." For the first time, Emily clearly felt that Robert was not a replacement. He was not trying to take her mother's place. He was just here, patiently and silently, waiting for her to open up. And now, she did. Spring came, bringing with it a breath of fresh air. Emily had been accepted into a university not far from home. The day she received the letter, Robert was the first person she shared the good news with. They celebrated with their favorite pizza and vanilla ice cream, Sarah's favorite when she was alive. "I'm leaving," Emily said as they sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes of things for their new journey. Robert nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I know." He paused, then added, "But this will still be your home. Wherever you go, as long as you want. This place will always be ready to welcome you back." Emily was silent, moved. She moved closer, wrapping her arms around Robert, no longer the awkward hug from the first day they met, but a real hug, from the heart. "I know," she whispered. "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me." Robert squeezed her gently in his arms. "I never thought about it, Emily. You've always been my daughter. For a long time. It just took time for you to realize it." The day Emily left, the sky was unusually blue. Robert helped her load her luggage into the car. The two of them stood in front of the house, the sunlight shining down, making Emily's hair shine like honey. "Dad," she called as she got into the car. Robert looked up. "I'll call often, but if I'm too busy, don't worry." He smiled, nodded. "As long as you know the way home." Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling. She leaned forward and kissed him lightly on the cheek, a simple gesture that held all the affection she had for this man. "I love you, Dad," she said it for the first time, and perhaps the most sincere time. Robert stood still, watching the car slowly disappear. He whispered to himself, or perhaps to Sarah, who was always somewhere in the middle of this house. "You see, Sarah, she's okay." Finally, she found her way home. That afternoon, Robert sat alone on the porch. In his hand was a family photo, the photo Emily had always avoided. Now, he placed it neatly on the table, where it was most visible. The little house was quiet, but it was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. Somewhere out there, Emily was starting a new chapter in her life. But Robert knew that the bond between them was now stronger than ever. Time passed more quickly than they expected. The gentle summer retreated, giving way to the golden autumn. Emily had officially entered college life. She moved into a dormitory at the university about a 2-hour drive away. It wasn't too far, but it was enough to make the small house where Robert lived feel emptier than ever. Robert returned to his familiar routine, waking up early, making coffee, reading the newspaper, gardening, but every morning, he checked his phone, expecting a text from Emily. She didn't disappoint. Emily called or texted almost every day. Sometimes it was just a photo of her school lunch, a short video of a squirrel hopping outside her window, or simply the words, "I miss home today." At times like that, Robert just smiled and texted back simply, "Me too. Don't forget to eat enough." They no longer needed long words or deep conversations. Just short conversations were enough to let them both know that, even though they were far apart, they were always thinking of each other. The first Thanksgiving without Emily was a challenge for Robert. He cooked a simple dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and stewed pumpkin, following the tradition Sarah had kept. The kitchen was filled with delicious smells, but the dining table was strangely empty. Just as Robert was about to sit down, the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, he froze. Emily was standing there, wrapped in a thick sweater, her cheeks flushed from the cold wind. "I think It would be weird not to have dinner with you today." She smiled brightly. Robert said nothing, just pulled her into his arms and held her tight. That dinner was warmer than any other time in years. They ate and talked about everything from Emily's new friends to their little troubles at school. The feeling of separation from those days was now just a faint memory. Winter came with white snow. Emily came home more often. Every time she returned, she contributed to making the house more lively. She hung lights, put greeting cards on the refrigerator, and brought back small gifts for Robert. One time, when they were decorating the Christmas tree, Emily suddenly said, "You know, I realized something." Robert stopped and looked at her expectantly. "When Mom was alive, I always thought family was something fixed. It was the three of us. Forever unchanging. When Mom died, I thought the family had fallen apart. But actually, family isn't something that's fixed. It's the people who stay, who continue to love each other, even though everything else has changed." Robert was speechless. He didn't expect Emily, the girl who once closed her heart, to be able to utter such profound words. He smiled, his eyes slightly stinging. "You've really grown up, Emily." She smiled back, stepping forward to hug him tightly. "I can only do that because of you." The following spring, Emily invited Robert to attend her freshman graduation. During that formal ceremony, as Emily walked up to the podium to receive her certificate, she looked down, where Robert was sitting in the parents' row. She smiled, bright and confident. It was a smile that Robert had never seen in all those lonely years before. A smile that truly belonged to a girl who had found herself again. That summer, Emily decided to stay home for a few months before going to her internship. The small house was once again filled with laughter. She helped Robert fix up the kitchen, learned how to cook more complicated dishes, and watched movies with him every night. Late one night, as the two of them sat on the porch, Emily leaned her head on Robert's shoulder and said softly, "Dad, I'm so lucky to have you here." Robert wrapped his arms around her and softly replied, "Me too. Thank you for letting me be a part of you." Time passed. Emily's life became busier and busier as she graduated and started her own job. But no matter what, she still returned home on holidays and weekends. The small house was always open to welcome her. Every time she returned, she sat with Robert on the porch, sipping tea or coffee, telling him about her trips and new plans. Without too many words, they understood that, no matter how life changed, no matter how each person had their own journey, the family bond between them was stronger than ever. Family is not blood. Family is where people choose to stay, together overcoming trauma and building new memories. And in that small house, between two people who were once strangers, love blossomed and bore fruit quietly but persistently. We all have our own definition of family. For Emily and Robert, it was a journey of overcoming loss, learning to understand and open up to each other. When the invisible walls fell away, what remained was a love that was deep, quiet and enduring. What about you? Have you experienced the same distance, or found real family in unexpected ways? Share your thoughts on this story. I'd love to hear your perspective. See you in the next story.